to today's session, the circular advantage from Denmark to Australia. As I was, some of you may well be asking, what exactly is the circular economy? Others of you will know full well that this is the way of the future. My understanding broadly is it's seeking to replace our current linear economy model of take, make, and dispose with a model that's altogether more sustainable and efficient, and particularly for developing and emerging economies. Now, obviously, I'm not an expert in this, but our speaker is. Dr. Scott Valentine is Senior Circular Economy Specialist at KPMG in Australia. Formerly, he's been Professor and Associate Dean of Sustainability and Urban Planning at RMIT University here in Melbourne. He's a prolific author in this field, and he's got extensive international experience, not least in Denmark, as we know, and in the Netherlands. Scott, it's really great to have you with us, and thank you very much for joining us. I'll now hand over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alistair and Ingrid, for agreeing to host my talk. It's a great pleasure to be joining you. Let us hope that technology is on our side here. I'll pull up my slides, and those of you at home or in your offices can't see this or hear this. It will probably be a fairly entertaining 15 or 20 minutes before you finally get fed up. But for those of you that are well connected, both with visual and audio connections, I welcome you and thank you for joining in. I can appreciate it's 5 o'clock, and as a result, most of the time it's nearing that stage in the day for a short tipple. Maybe I could turn this into a small game by suggesting that every time I say circular advantage, how about if you take a drink of the spirit of your choice? The circular economy is a fascinating area for me, and a lot of the roots of my understanding of the circular economy is thanks to experiences that I've had in Denmark and in the Netherlands. And Denmark in particular has been very impactful in terms of sharing insights into how to make a circular economy work. And so as I take up my post here at KPMG, helping to coordinate the circular economy work at the firm, I find myself often dipping back into lessons that have been learned. And today I'm hoping to be able to share some of these insights on this talk on the circular advantage from Denmark to Australia. Before I get into the economic rationale, I think the basic flow of this will be I'm out of necessity finding it necessary in most of my talks just to take a small step back to remind everybody what the circular economy is. I noticed that on this list of people who are dialed in today, there's a number of people that work in the field, and I think this first 5 or 10 minutes, it will certainly be old hat and a little bit boring to you, but for those of you that are new to the circular economy, I hope you'll gain a little bit from this short review. Once we do that, I'll introduce you to a program called Rethink Business, which is a program that was run in Denmark, and it sheds some very interesting insights into what exactly the circular economy means for corporations and for those who are preparing corporate strategy. And then when I finish the coverage of the case studies associated with the Rethink Business project, I'll end up by introducing you to a really exciting program called Circular Advantage that is being run here in Melbourne through Hume and City Councils. And I note that my partners in crime, Angela Stubbs from the city of Kingston and Ian Davies from the city of Hume, are also dialed in. So, you know, you've got all of us in one place if you have any questions on the program. Okay, so economic rationale. Why are we interested in the circular economy, and what's it all about? What has given rise to this new interest in something called circularity? Well, I think this small table here outlines a very interesting and impactful story in regard to our usage of resources, and fully highlights exactly why the circular economy is important. As you can see here, as a result of a combination of population growth plus growing affluence around the world, what we've got occurring is a gradual acceleration or amplification of demand for scarce resources. And the impact is now being felt in terms of resource scarcity, which again is starting to cascade into price increases for many key commodities. The scarcity issue is of particular concern because if you look at this chart, this is what we call a production to reserves ratio. And I'll preface this by saying two things. First of all, what is it? A production to reserves ratio is really a ratio of how much of a good is produced in one year and how many reserves, how much of this given commodity we have in reserves. And so you take a ratio of that. So when you see a ratio of 0.2, it essentially means that we have less than 50 years of that resource left in terms of proven resources. If it's 0.4, it means that we have less than 25 years of those proven resources left. Now, there's a caveat to this because I don't want this to seem disingenuous and alarmist. The caveat is this. We've been talking about scarcity in oil, for example, for decades. And there's been a lot of talk about peak oil and when is it going to run out. And the thing with proven reserves is that proven reserves only reflect what we know now. It does not reflect what we know, what might be uncovered in the future. And of course, what typically happens is as price goes up for a given commodity, it increases the incentives to discover more of it, and it justifies investing in these types of discovery activities. So I don't mean to be alarmist about this, but the bottom line I still think remains true, which is we are increasingly finding ourselves facing some scarce resources that are the backbone to some of our economic activities. And regardless of whether this runs out in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, it doesn't matter because as we start to approach the cliff face, we will find that prices start to amplify. And as a result of that, we are seeing a rise in commodity prices. So that's why we're interested in the circular economy, because if we can't use resources that are in scarce supply in a more efficient way, we are going to find our economic systems undertaking or exposed to huge costs that we may not be able to fully afford. Now, from a national perspective, why would we be interested in the circular economy? Those of us that are friends that are joining from Denmark, and I haven't been able to access the roster. Otherwise, my heart would be aglow with the fact that you've actually joined, and I get a chance to at least see some of your names again. But you know, in the European Union, there is a clear trend toward support for the circular economy, and indeed all nations are now working toward a directive that compels them to contribute increasing amounts of recycled materials into their economic system. So my question here, since this is something that's relevant to Australia as well, is just to ask you to reflect on this. Where is Australia's competitive advantage right now? Think about the way that business is being done around the world nowadays. Think about, first of all, technology here, productivity through technology. Does China not have the same equipment that Australia has? Does Japan not have the same equipment? Vietnam? All of the nations around the world have seen a convergence in terms of technological capabilities. So the idea of having technological advantage has been eroding. The second thing is productivity through people. You know, organizations outcompete others by simply having better people and having them perform better. Well, that's true, except think about how managers are now educated around the world. Here in Australia, I believe the last figure was something like 20% of our GDP is generated by education facilities and organizations. And a great a large number of the students that make up the student body here in Australia are foreign students. In other words, everybody has the same knowledge. They're going back with the same skills. So we don't any longer have a technological advantage. We don't have an advantage in terms of the way that we manage people, and we certainly don't have a technological an advantage in terms of how we structure our machines, our equipment, and our processes. All of that has eroded. So where is the future for companies? How do they gain competitive advantage? Well, I believe that the circular economy is indeed one of the ways in this new century that competitive advantage will be, acquired by organizations. So how do they do this, and how does this fit into a national uh, view of the circular economy? Well, the best organization, to go to if you're interested in exploring the circular economy is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's a fabulous source of material and reference reports. So if you Google Ellen MacArthur Foundation, you'll be taken to a wealth of material. Amongst this, they have this diagram, and it's well known as the butterfly diagram. And basically, it explains what the circular economy is. The circular economy is essentially a resource optimization strategy for all the reasons we talked about earlier. Nations want to optimize resources because if it encourages businesses to use resources more efficiently, they gain competitive advantage. But there's one other element to a commitment to the circular economy that governments are really interested in, and that's at the bottom part here of this diagram. Because as you can see, in a linear economy where you're up at the top, you're digging out resources, you're processing them, you're transporting them to a user, you're selling them, the user then uses them, throws them away. Energy is recovered, meaning that the materials are burnt, hopefully, in some sort of waste energy facility, and then it's thrown away. That's the circular economy. Now, at the bottom here represents a mass of municipal cost. And in Australia, my guess, I haven't seen any numbers on this, my guess would be the cost of dealing with waste in terms of landfilling materials is probably somewhere around $10 billion a year. So this represents a real cost to the government. The second element is that if this material can be recycled or retasked or reintroduced back into the supply chain, what we're actually doing there is we're producing more using the same resource. In other words, we are gaining more productivity from our resources. And when you gain more productivity from your resources, you make more money. And that's how you increase the GDP and affluence in a nation. Okay, so this is really why governments around the world are interested in the circular economy. Now, if I can take a step back for a minute, here in Australia, the circular economy has been sired through a crisis in waste management, predominantly caused by foreign nations who have understandably said, no, thank you, we don't want your resources anymore, deal with them in your own domestic capacity. And so recycling has almost become a synonymous term with the circular economy. And as you can see from this butterfly diagram, it is just a small component of it. Indeed, it's quite an insignificant and an unimpactful component when it comes to the profitability of the circular economy. Because where does the money lie? The money lies in all of these activities before the recycling function. So let me give you an example. If you've got a user that has a particular component, let's say an iPhone, that gets broken, well, if you can easily maintain that, so if you can repair that in a simple way, then there's money that goes back into the economy through repair services. The user can then make better use of that phone and gain better productivity from it. So here is how we, start to bolster the economy through higher productivity. Similarly, if we can take a particular machine or a part or a computer or something like that and move it up through a process of refurbishment, what it does is it infuses an area of cheap parts back into the system. So that's this one with the industrial icon here. So the idea behind this is that if we can have a refurbishment program, we are essentially getting parts and materials that are pretty much ready to go. All it needs to be done is updating and some replacement of select parts. So again, we're improving the productivity of materials. That's why it's interesting to national planners. Okay, so some of you have probably come from the corporate world, and at this stage you're probably into your third gin. By the way, circular economy, circular economy, circular economy. You owe me 3 drinks. But the question I think you should be asking yourself, if you're interested in this from a business perspective, is so what? And what does this mean for us? And what does this diagram tell us about running our businesses more effectively? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't tell us a lot. There's a lot hidden in this diagram. It's a brilliant diagram, but where the corporate strategy takes place is along these loops, these little blue lines that are running through the system. So to understand the value of the circular economy from a corporate perspective, we need to dig down into a micro lens. And oh, sorry, I had a slide here that I just wanted to put forward for people who are interested in the Australia waste management picture. 40% of the waste that's generated in Australia goes to landfill. So it's a significant loss of money from the economy and a significant cost, which justifies why all of the states in Australia are now developing circular economy policies to drive the market in this way. Okay, so how do we make this relevant for business? Well, let's take a micro view. And to do that, we turn to another framework. And this framework is a framework that also has been created by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And it's called the Resolve framework. And all it really is it's a design thinking tool. And often we have our own tools that we use at KPMG that I'm not really in a position to share with you publicly, but this is a good way of understanding how an organization might want to dissect its practices and see where there might be value incorporated in adopting a circular economy strategy. And I'm not going to discuss this too much at this stage, only to say that this framework exists, because in the next section, I'm going to take each one of these categories and I'm going to give you some case studies, both from Melbourne and from Denmark, in regard to how this can be used to inform corporate strategy. Okay. So capacity building, how do we do this? Well, the program that we have developed here in Melbourne has been informed significantly by Denmark's Rethink business. And I thought it would be very useful to explain how the Resolve framework works by describing the Rethink business program itself. As I said, I haven't had the list of attendees, but I know that some colleagues from Denmark have joined us, and I really hope that you have an opportunity to begin to ask some questions or provide some updates, or indeed set me on the right direction if anything that I've said to describe this program has been incorrect. So, building capacity. Now, the Rethink Business Program is a program that was developed in the Jutland area of Denmark, in between Aarhus, Herning, and Viborg, approximately. This is known as the Central Midlands region, and it was a program that was essentially designed by a collaboration between the Central Midlands government and I believe Hannah Yule might be joining us today, if not, and Christian Fredso. And if you're there, out there somewhere, welcome. I'm looking forward to catching up in the Q&A. Plus an industrial promotion group that dealt with textiles called Lifecycle and Design Cluster. And what's fascinating about this, and this is really going to highlight what can actually be achieved by just a few champions. Lifecycle Design Cluster at the time adopted this model. So this is 2012. They adopted a program over 3 years where they took 20 businesses and took them through a year-long process of engaging with the companies with the support of consultants to develop circular economy roadmaps. And so I think we might even be joined by the CEO of Vuge to Vuge, which is a Cradle to Cradle organization in Denmark. And I think Stefan Brenstrup from Plus has also joined us. So I look forward to your participation in the Q&A as well. But what I wanted to say about this program is that it was actually developed by 3 people, essentially. And it was headed by a dear friend, Sven Erik Nielsen, who, with a couple of other colleagues and the CEO, supported by the CEO of Lifestyle Design Cluster, Bettina Simonson, they put together a bid and won this bid to train up these companies. So to date, they've trained over 70 businesses in the creation of circular economy strategies. There are a lot of lessons that we've learned along the way in reviewing how this program has come together, but first and foremost is the need for top-level commitment. It needs to be driven from a strategic perspective, not from the sustainability perspective. Make no mistake about it, I will show you as these case studies go along, the circular economy is really a hardcore corporate business strategy. It just so happens to also be able to enhance sustainability programs at the corporate level. The other thing is the need to develop these collaborative networks, and so what I've actually suggested here is that here in Melbourne, we need to reach out and build a much stronger network that we have. We've got some wonderful people that are working in this, and everyone is striving to get out and to make presentations such as this to like-minded individuals, because there's room for everybody in this at this stage. There are a lot of roles that people can play, and I'd like to encourage you to follow up and get involved if you're interested in this area. But let's talk about what happened with the companies, and let me give you some examples of how companies can benefit from using this strategy. And I'm just going to close off. I'm concerned that my Q&A window, if I'm sharing this, is actually getting in the way of you being able to see my slides. If it is, excuse me for that. I'll shut that down there. So regeneration. A great example of a regenerative strategy for corporations was highlighted from a company called Tor's Design. It's owned by someone named Karsten Tor, and he had a wonderful product. Basically, his idea was he was taking down or taking on the material from wharves, that were being dismantled, and he took on the wood because he noticed that the wood had some real character to it. It was infused with some of the lacquers that were intended to provide a degree of waterproofing, and over time it had created some very unique wood products. And I don't know if you can see this, but here's an example of some of the products that Karsten and his group have made. This is a candle holder, and if you can actually see the material, you can almost still smell the sea from the wood that's been used in this. So here's a great example of a regenerative strategy. You know, here's an organization that has taken something that would otherwise wind up in a landfill, probably be incinerated because it's wood, and he's taken this back and he's repurposed these for household furnishings. And in doing so, he attaches cards to this that tell the story of the wharves themselves. So it, you know, it then personalizes the actual products themselves. A wonderful way of making use of a resource that would normally wind up in a landfill. Here in Melbourne, and I'm giving a trade-off of both Danish and Australian examples because I don't want people thinking that we're not busy here in Australia. We are. There's a company in town here called Reground that does a similar thing in terms of a regenerative strategy in regard to coffee. And this was set up by somebody who was just a barista who looked at all of the coffee grounds in her coffee shop one day and said, this is a terrible waste of resources. I can't believe we're just throwing this away. This is normally something that on many YouTube sites you would see that forms a valuable product when it comes to creating compost material. And so she went about creating a program where they were collecting materials and you know, using the coffee grounds for an input into compost. So if you're interested in this, look it up. That's Reground in Australia. So those are ideas of how a company can think about how can you take a waste material that would normally be thrown away and retask it for something that actually adds to the betterment of society. The second strategy in the Resolve framework is share. And here's a really good example from the Danish Rethink business case studies. This company is called Advanced Interwoven. And Advanced Interwoven, my contact there was someone named Fleming Work, who is their marketing manager. And they produce a really interesting machine called a Kaft machine. Now, the Kaft machine is essentially a machine that has an attachment at the front end that is really kind of a thresher. And what happens is you put your organics in the top of this machine and you combine it with a binding agent called BICO, and it mixes it up and it creates a new material. Now, it depends on how you set the rollers on this machine in order to characterize what the material winds up looking like as an end product. So here are some examples here. Patrick, you've asked for what are some examples. You're going to be getting a whole boatload of them in a second. Okay, so advanced interwoven, if you set the rollers on this material for a fairly light roll, what happens is you get a nice cushiony substance. Now, what is this substance? This is used newspapers combined with the BICO agent. And so as you can see, you can imagine what the potential uses are of this. This could be potentially very useful padding for seats. It could act as an insulator in certain circumstances. And what's it comprised of? Used newspapers. So it's removing newspapers from the waste chain. Now, if you set the pressure a little bit more on this Kaft machine, you can create something like this. Now, this is another material. This is made out of wool. So this is wool plus BICO. And as you can see, it's a much more rigid material. So once again, here's a new product that can be used for things like perhaps padding, seat paddings. It could be potentially used for insulation in jackets. There are a number of possibilities. If you set the setting a little bit more on the Kaft machine, you can create even more significant innovations. And you can just barely see it in this picture, and I don't have a sample. But here at the front, sitting on top of this Kaft machine, you can maybe see this brown mold. And what that is it's actually, it's a seat that is made out of hemp material plus BICO. And what they've done is they've set this at the maximum setting to gain the maximum rigidity. with the idea that once they press this seat, all you need to do is add legs, and you've got a fully recyclable furnishing offering, because you can just, when it breaks, or if you want a new type of design, you just remove the legs from this, throw it back in the Caft machine's hopper, and create a new material from this. Wonderful examples of being able to use new innovations. I'm just going to check on the questions that are coming through here. Reduce the cost of. Okay, so you want to talk about reducing the cost? Well, we'll have to. I'll put that off for the Q&A session. So moving on to share. Oh, by the way, so you might be interested. Why did this company get involved in the Rethink business program in Denmark? Well, for them, they had this machine. Now, this machine is pretty expensive. Some of the models can be north of €1 million. And so as a result of this, they were having trouble selling the machines because it was hard to find one organization that had enough product to use in this to justify the expenditure. And so part of their involvement in the Rethink Business project was to come in and explore how they could, design new marketing models to encourage the uptake of this machine. And lo and behold, as a result of the Rethink Business project, we found that Advanced Nonwoven entered into an arrangement with the local municipality to create a hub for the recycling of materials. I'm not sure where they are with that yet, but it's a new market, because essentially what they're doing now is they're acting as a batch shop for the processing of these types of materials. Okay. Someone's asking, once this material is being added to the organic materials, does this then make these materials harder to recycle? It is harder to compost because the BECO is not compostable, but it can be recycled, because all you need to do is just top up the BECO and top up any other material that you're putting in, and regrind it again. So it's a fully circular machine. Thanks for the question. A good example of a sharing economy. So why is this a sharing strategy? It's a sharing strategy because here's a company that had a machine that they wanted to sell, and rather than selling it to somebody, what they've then started to explore is there a way that we can actually lease out this machine as for batch lots to support smaller businesses. Here's a great example in Melbourne of our sharing strategy in action. We've got repair cafes where people can come and get their broken electronics repaired with people who are equally interested as hobbyists in supporting this. And all the cost is just an upfront subscription fee. But think about the wonders of a sharing economy this way. And this applies also, by the way, going back to advanced interwoven, is that if you've got these type of business models, what you're doing is you're connecting people. Often the people that come to the repair cafes to offer up their expertise in fixing these machines are retired, they're between jobs, they just need some way to connect socially. And so this is a way that they can feel good about giving back. Meanwhile, you've got people in the community who really need, they don't want to waste their products. They really need to connect with somebody that can help them. And in this way, there's also a sense of community building and relying on local contributions. Okay. I'll skip this except to say this is another famous example of a sharing strategy in the circular economy, and that's called Rent the Runway, which is essentially a clothing rental organization. The idea is you take on a certain number of pieces over a period of time. The problem with this is that without that connection that we see in the Melbourne Repair Cafe, these things then just become commodities, and over time they have no lasting power. So those of you that are looking at exploring a sharing strategy, I think the key is you've got to find ways to connect with your customers. Okay, how are you going to roll out the program with local councils? Asks Aspire, who I'm going to talk about in a minute. So just a minute, Cam, I'll be with you in a minute. Okay, optimizing. Here's an example of two optimization strategies, one from Denmark, one from Australia. The Danish one is Dansk Wilton, which is a cradle-to-cradle certified product. Basically, the idea behind it is you can take this material and you can peel off the backing. The backing here is made from pet fiber. The top is made from wool. You peel it off and it's fully recyclable. So rather than this going into a landfill, what we've done is we've optimized use of this resource. Example of this here in Australia is through our friend Steve Morris at Close the Loop, and I hope Steve has joined us. Steve is just an absolute pioneer in this here in Australia. He's also the head of circular economy at Planet Arc, so he's a person to get in touch with if you would like to follow up on what the circular economy really means in Australia. You know, his product is called Toner Plus, or one of his products, which is essentially a combination of toner. So his company, Close the Loop, recycles toner from printer cartridges. They've combined that with a solution for roading with asphalt to combine plastic bags, glass bottles, print cartridges, and this all forms a new product called Toner Plus, which is constantly being modified. And the benefit of it is that not only is this product using a lot of recycled material, but it's also creating longer lasting roads in Victoria. So, okay. Someone, Leslie's asking, is there a problem with car sharing? Yes, there sure is. There sure is. And don't get me wrong here. I'm advocating for the circular economy, but there are issues there. You know, we've seen issues throughout Asia in regard to the safety of things like car sharing services. So, you know, definitely there are issues that need to be worked out in any corporate strategy. Okay, in terms of this optimization strategy, I just like to make a point that, you know, companies that still think that they have solved all of the problems often really are a long way away from still being optimal when it comes to resource usage. Here's a picture from Australia, a well-known supermarket chain. This young guy is standing in front of a bed of ice in the seafood section. This is a hose full of hot water that costs money to produce. He's using up his time to spray on ice, which also took money to produce, in order to get rid of the ice. Now you tell me how much that costs over 365 days a year times 810 shops across Australia. And before you know it, you'll see yourself being faced with a very large cost estimate. Okay, looping. There's a few strategies in looping that I wanted to show you, particularly from Denmark, and I'll just move away from the screen for a minute as I give you some more examples. This is a company called Troldtech. Troldtech makes this material. If you look very carefully at this material, you'll see inherently what it is. It's a bunch of wood fibers that are tied together with plaster. And what it does is it creates a perfect acoustic tile. And so here in the picture, you've got a ceiling with the Troldtech acoustic tiles installed. The question that Troldtech was asking themselves when they joined the Rethink Business program is, since we're using virgin wood for this process, can we not recycle it? Is there not a way that we could look at using recycled construction materials in order to create a similar type of product? Another company in terms of a looping style. Here's, moving away from the screen again for a minute. Here's a company called Compromont. They make this. This is a slate tile that has been modified to serve as a rendering on the side of buildings. And so what's wonderful about this is that, as you can see, it's got an aluminum bracket, and the bracket is affixed with one screw. So the idea behind it is that if you want to purchase this product as a rendering for buildings, as opposed to some of the flammable stuff that we've been using here in Australia, this can just be clicked onto a frame that's embedded on the side of a house or an apartment building. And so anytime this particular slate material gets broken or needs to be replaced, it just gets clipped out and recycled. Meanwhile, a new one can easily be placed back in. Here's another example of a wonderful company that was associated with the Rethink Business Program, Nubo Workwear. They've started investigating new materials for their hospital uniforms, and they're looking at bamboo, and they're looking at Reprieve, which is a garment that is made from recycled PET bottles. And for those of you that are in Australia, if you're interested in looking at the Reprieve product, the closest place you can go is to Target, that carries the Reprieve line. I certainly know in women's fashion, at least. I'll skip virtualization. It's safe to say that a virtualization strategy in the circular economy means stopping using resources for having a shop front. And so what better example of that but Netflix? Those of you that are as old as I am will remember taking your VHS tapes down to that, Blockbuster, whatever the video store was, and standing there in vain of finding that new release that inevitably has been taken out by another customer. And so now with Netflix, we've got better service, we've got better access to materials, and the company obviously that has moved everything virtually has now saved itself millions in on-site and retail costs. Increasingly, of course, as we work our way through COVID, we're realizing that, the internet and e-commerce is increasingly important. Another great example of virtualization strategy is a really important trading hub that's been created by our friends at Aspire, Cameron McKenzie, who's joined us today. And Cam has created this network. It was developed in a project under CSIRO, and then Cam took it over and began to build on this as a commercial product. And it's still in its infancy. They're still developing it out, but it's going to play a key role in helping to track materials in the circular economy. So those of you in Australia that are interested, I believe, Cam, your website is aspiresme.com, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe you can confirm that in the Q&A to make sure that people know how to get hold of you. Finally, last but not least, exchange. Well, there was a company in Denmark that decided, rather than selling window coverings and shadings, what they would do is they would offer a leaseback program. How about that for an interesting strategy? So rather than selling this to people, what you've got is a model where they lease this back. And think about this in connection with this room here. This is obviously a child's room. How long is a child going to want to have little cute houses on their window coverings for? 10 years, maybe 15 max. So eventually you're going to get to a stage where the child is going to want something more adult and going to want to shift into a separate window shading. Wouldn't it be wonderful if rather than having to throw away your old window shadings, you could just phone up the company and ask them to swap it up with a new window covering? Here in Australia, wonderful example of this exchange society is GlobeLit. This was formed by a group of individuals who went to many of Australia's wonderful concerts and found themselves treading over a mass of littered cups at the end of a concert. So what they do is they've created these cups that are essentially leased. What happens is you pay an extra $2 or whatever it is for your cup at a concert. You then use it for as much as you want. You exchange it. You bring it back to the vendor. You exchange it for a new one when you want a new drink. And at the end of the day, you come back and return your empty cup and get your $2 back. So what a wonderful way to keep litter out of the waste stream and keep plastic out of the waste stream. These are simply washed up at the end of concerts. So that's it, folks. That's sort of my review of how you can benefit from the circular economy if you are a corporate leader looking for ways to tap into a strategy for enhancing both sustainability and profits at the same time. I will say, and if you don't mind me ending with a short plug here, we have a program with Hume and Kingston called the Circular Advantage. It's open to Hume and Kingston businesses. The idea behind it is we are trying to create a lot of feel-good stories and successes in order to promote the idea of the circular advantage. I am feeling very strongly that anybody that partakes in this will wind up more than covering the costs of the program, because they have been significantly subsidized by the councils in order to deliver the program. And so I feel pretty confident that most of the companies on board will more than recoup any of the costs involved in taking this program. The basic fundamentals are, it's all online now. It's going to be a 6-month program delivered online through a series of modules. It will not be one way. It's all about connecting people. So we're going to connect through various different technologies. We're going to be running online forums. And the idea is we're going to take businesses from the start to the end in terms of creating circular economy roadmaps. At the end of this program, you're going to wind up with a strategy that has been costed out and prioritized so that you know where your hidden profits lay. So if you're interested, those of you that are running businesses in Hume, please contact Ian Davies. This is his email address. Below that is for businesses that are in Kingston City. Please contact Angela Stubbs. She can connect you to the program. And those of you that are not in Hume and not in Kingston but are interested in the program, we're definitely going to have a round 2 down the road. And if you drop me a line, and so here's my email address here, you can certainly register your interest, and I will be back in touch with you. So that's it, folks. I shall pass this back to Alistair, if you don't mind. There's some, I know that there's some Q&A questions that I've missed out on. What do you think, Alistair? Shall we work our way through this, or is there anything that stood out that you think I should be answering?
Yes, there are a number there, Scott, we can work our way through. One in particular just jumped out at me, and this is looking slightly more geopolitically, I suppose. Do you think that COVID-19 may possibly supercharge behavior towards a circular economy?
Yes. For a number of reasons. One is the focus on e-commerce now. We're all getting used to it. There's a whole bunch of people that I know now that they were afraid to use some of the online e-commerce tools, and that's now going away. So this is a mass training program that we're seeing in action right now, Alistair. The other side of this is, here's the question I have to ask a lot of firms that are suffering from financial problems right now. What would your business look like if you would have adopted a virtualization strategy, even as a secondary strategy before COVID? So those are two elements that are really driving change in the marketplace. And the third one is that COVID is just part of a broader issue where people are looking at our use of the environment, and these types of diseases are just they epitomize unsustainable practices. They get tied in with climate change and all of the other environmental concerns that we have. And frankly, I just think that Australians, and we're seeing that in the climate change protests, are just fed up with that type of approach to a consumptive society, and they're looking for a change. And they're going to support companies that are, in lockstep with the idea of sustainable business.
Another point that just occurred to me is much of what you're talking about seems to be initiated or driven at a local level, whether it's a company or a council. How much is happening at a higher level, say through the UN Environment Programme, or at city level, or international conglomeration of mayors or anything? Is there a wider focus happening as well?
Yes. Everywhere. I mean, this is, so the circular economy is clearly under, at the very least, SDG goal 12, which is responsible consumption and production. But it ties into, job creation, which is 9. It ties into, productivity, which is SDG 8. It ties into, a number of other of the ecologically focused goals. And so, unsurprisingly, the UN Global Compact is behind this. We work extensively with the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. And in fact, we have just created a tool for businesses that will help them to assess their circularity. It's called the Circular Transition Index, and you can find out more about that from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development's website. So yeah, it's here in Victoria, we've got $300 million that DELP has just ponied up for supporting the circular economy. And frankly, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what's happening in industry. The PAC Group, along with Cleanaway and Asahi Beer, has just announced that they're going to spend $500 million over the next few years trying to realign its practices towards sustainability. Coca-Cola is on board with another change initiative. Then there's all of the local bodies. Again, I think Steve has joined us. So Planet Arc has a national circular economy hub that is run out of Sydney that you're going to see more about. There's an organization called Circular Economy Victoria that's run by Sean Trewick, who is reaching out to consumers and helping to educate consumers on the circular economy. So lots and lots happening.
How well is the US doing? Could that be a circular economy is one question, and if not, why?
So sorry, I missed the first part.
How well is the United States doing in terms of developing circular economy?
Oh, well, well, first of all, circular economy, we said that twice. So those of you at home, make sure you take a drink. Alistair, you have you have baited me really effectively there, because as a Canadian, there's nothing more that I like to than to provide a critique of the United States.
Question.
Oh, I see. Listen, the United States is also going through the throes of understanding what better resource usage means. They are suffering from an equivalent amount of both resource problems, shortages, social ills caused by pollution. And at the federal level, as you know, there is absolutely zero leadership when it comes to anything of any value to our planet. But at the state level, there is a lot of really effective people. And in fact, I've got a conversation on Saturday with somebody from California that's looking at new circular economy programs. So, and this actually does parallel in a way what's happening in Australia. We're finding that a lot of times this gets done at the grassroots level. And for us in Australia, from the public side, it's really the councils that are really pushing this through their economic development departments, and Ian and Angela are good examples of that. But in addition to that, we've got Sustainability Victoria that is just on the verge of announcing a host of new funding strategies to support the circular economy. So I'm happy to come back anytime and discuss where we are in the future as we move forward.
sort of keeping an eye on the clock just so we
Yeah.
can finish promptly. There are a host of questions I'm not going to get through, but there's one from a recent business graduate wanting to get into this. Are there any sort of master's programs that you think, to inspire young people, because they're the future with all this? Anything that you think would be good for students and young people to get more involved?
Is this person from Denmark or?
Oh, possibly.
Okay. Well, I mean, unsurprisingly, the circular economy, the hotbeds globally are really in Europe, China, Taiwan, a little bit in Japan. And so unsurprisingly, we're seeing, education programs, I would say, are stronger in Europe. The two that I would have in mind, there's one from Bradford, I believe, that's a postgraduate degree in the circular economy. And there's another one, which is a wonderful program at the, I think it's the Technological University of Delft. And they are really world leaders in this. They do a lot of really wonderful work in circular economy education. Aside from that, those that don't want to take, these types of specialized programs, I would encourage them to, consider other ways to twin the circular economy with other types of vocations. For example, those that are going into MBAs, to learn more about the circular economy will make you a more effective strategist in the future. Similarly, for those who are looking at political science or public policy degrees, knowledge of the circular economy would go a long way to, opening up some job opportunities in the future.
I think we're possibly just heading now to the final question, but there's been a lot of talk about soft power and Australia's role in the region. What do you think Australia has to bring maybe to its immediate neighbourhood? I'm thinking more the South Pacific or some of those smaller emerging economies in our neighbourhood.
Yeah, Alistair, I arrived in Australia about 1.5 years ago. And when I arrived, there was just sort of a trickle of work being done here. In that 1.5 years, in that 1.5 years, the circular economy has just exploded here. And suddenly we've gone from really truly laggards to very strong contenders for regional leadership. And what I mean is the Asia Pacific leadership in the circular economy. I see there to be a lot of scope internationally for connections, because as we see in the circular economy, one of the key elements to it is tracking your supply system and being able to take the materials at the end and getting them back into the supply chain. And of course, here in the Asia Pacific, most companies, even in Australia, have suppliers that are in Asia. And being able to connect all of this together represents a wonderful opportunity.
Well, Scott, I mean, we have so many questions. We could keep going on and on here. It's a sign of a great talk always when you have a lot of questions. Apologies to anyone who's asked and who we didn't get to answer, but Scott had kindly put his details there. Maybe you could follow up with him directly. But Scott, fantastic talk. Yeah. It's a shame to get to the end. We try and sort of finish promptly when we do these things. Awesome use of props. I'm really impressed by
Thank you.
all that array of stuff, and you certainly answered Patrick's question about do you have examples. So
yeah,
I think our thanks to you very much for your time. Thank you for all of the audience for joining us, and yes. We look forward to seeing you again. You, Scott, perhaps another talk here, especially when we can get out of lockdown and come and do it face to face. It would be great in Melbourne. But for everyone, wherever you are, please stay safe and well. And we look forward to seeing you again at one of our forthcoming webinars, which are coming very soon. So thank you all very much and stay well. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Alistair. Thanks again. Thanks, everyone, for joining.